Welcome everyone to Male Fuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about the Twilight Zone from the 1980s. This is season 1, episode 9. It's called Dead Woman's Shoes and the second story is called Wong's Lost and Found Emporium. So, spoilers, of course, for the episode. This is a Patreon sponsored review. Thank you to Cindy for picking this show. So yeah, we got two meatier stories this time that are about half the length of the episode each, give or take. I think the first one's slightly longer, but nothing really worth mentioning. The first one is interesting in that it's, I think, the first episode or the first story that we've had that is a remake of sorts of one of the old episodes. It's significantly changed. Like, the basic premise is kind of there, obviously, because the episode in the original was called Dead Man's Shoes, and it was about like a gangster, I think, who or someone wore a gangster's shoes and became the gangster. And the gangster then went to try and settle some old scores whilst possessing this I think it was a homeless man who was wearing the shoes. And that was the idea. The idea that once you put on the dead person's shoes, they become you, or you become them, and they have a chance to use your body for whatever. Here, we flip it, and we have Helen Mirren starring in the lead role. She is the woman who puts on the shoes and becomes someone else. Jeffrey Tambor is also in this story, so a couple of bigger names for this one, which is cool. So, yeah, I think it's an interesting pivot from the original, and I want to say that the story here is a little bit more sympathetic than the one in the original. Like, I remember thinking the original had a good concept, but it wasn't like a standout episode overall for me at the time. I think it was a season 3 episode. I think ultimately the actual backstory of the character that the homeless man became was never that exciting on its own. It was kind of just, we're going through the motions because we're exploring what the idea of the story is here. This one, it focuses on a woman, or I should say the spirit of the woman who takes over Helen Mirren was a rich wife who died, and Jeffrey Tambor's the husband. To be honest, even from the start of the story, I kind of suspected that we were probably going to find out that he had killed his wife. There's not even really anything great that indicates that at the start. It just felt like a natural way for it to go, kind of thing. So, the shoes are given to Goodwill. Helen Mirren works at Goodwill, and she puts on the shoes. And the episode does a good job of like establishing what type of character she is, right? And it really focuses on the feet at the start as well, where she's walking down the street and the camera's down at feet level, and it's showing her walking very timid. She's clearly like moving out of the way for other people. There's kids skateboarding past her. There's people in heavier shoes, high heels, whatever it may be, more confident looking feet, as strange as that statement is. But when she gets to the store and she sees this box with the shoes in it, she seems to like them kind of quickly. But we see, again, her being made fun of by a couple of younger women who kind of mock her appearance and act like she's, this boring old woman, even though she's not that old here. She's in her, maybe her 40s, I guess. I don't know what age Helen Mirren was in 1985. But she's presenting this very meek personality, and then the big capper to that is that this kind of sleazy guy, played by Robert Pastorelli, who I do reckon, I want to say, is he in Eraser, the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie? I think he is. I think that's him. Oh, and Beverly Hills Cop 2. That does sound right, actually, now that I'm seeing it. I'm checking. I want to know if it's him, because I want to know if yeah, it is from Eraser. Yeah, I nailed it. Anyway, he comes over and he starts putting the moves, right? He clearly sees an appeal in a timid woman that he can perhaps dominate and control. It feels, he feels like a sleazy guy, right? He doesn't necessarily do anything super wrong, but he's being very imposing. Helen Mirren's clearly uncomfortable with these advances, but she retreats to the back room and she puts on the shoes in a moment of wanting to feel confident. But of course, the ghost, or whatever you want to call it, takes over, and she immediately changes her demeanor. And it returns to the shooting style of the opening scene, which is that we just follow her feet as she walks out the store. And this guy comes up to her again, and she just tells him to beat it. They're very confident, get lost, loser, and walks out kind of, high and mighty. But we only see that from the perspective of the shoes, which I think, is a good idea for this opening kind of segment of the episode of the story, because it really enforces the idea of the shoes as the central thing, you know, because I mean, it's not even the first scene actually. Where there's a quick scene at the mansion where Jeffrey Tambor tells the maid to take the shoes to Goodwill and demands a receipt, basically to make sure that she's not stolen anything. So it does kind of present him as not a nice guy at the very least, even if you're not jumping to murder her. But the story then becomes about her going to confront her husband. She goes to the house. The maid is like, wait, why are you here? Who are you? But Helen Mirren acts confident. She calls her by name. She brings up details that she couldn't possibly know. It mostly confuses the maid character more than anything else. But then she calls him at his office and, you know, says a bunch of things that sound kind of weird, and like she knows stuff about his wife, and he's like, who are you? Why are you pretending to be my dead wife? And he's taking it very seriously. But ultimately, she says enough to convince him to come home. Now, in between this, it might have been before the phone call scene, Helen Mirren goes to like have a bath because she wants to be freshened up for when the husband gets home. And I thought it jumped ahead after the bath, and I was getting ready to call bullshit because I'm like, wait a minute, how did she get a bath without taking the shoes off? But to be fair to the episode, that they did not forget this, because she's just getting ready to take the bath. She takes the shoes off and immediately snaps back to being her real self and gets scared because she has no idea how she got here, how she got to this big house, who this maid is. And the maid kind of like says, hey, you need to get out of here. Like you've stormed into the house. You're being weird. This is all straight. And at this point, you know, Helen Mirren's back to being meek. She's back to being kind of helpless. And she just sort of agrees to whatever she says and to go. But then, of course, she puts the shoes back on and once again immediately snaps back to being the powerful, determined, rich wife who wants revenge on her husband. And I think the maid sort of recognizes this because she's in the room for her putting the shoes back on and notices that change in her demeanor instantly. I will point out in this scene, there is, and this is the sort of thing that was probably hidden back in the day by overscan on TVs, because even though TVs were 4:3 and I'm watching it in 4:3 because, you know, I don't zoom because I'm not a filthy scoundrel piece of scum kind of thing. But even with that, though, TVs are a lot better now in the sense that they show you all the way to the very edge of the image. You don't lose any of it. And there is a very, very prominent boom mic moving around for a couple of seconds at the top of the frame in one of the wide shots in this scene. So I'm not really complaining so much. It's funny though, because I've seen this pop up in occasional TV shows from the 80s and 90s, and it seems to be a thing where it doesn't pop up in movies as much unless you're watching like really, you know, badly made movies. It tends to pop up in TV more, because I remember seeing it once or twice in like a Lois and Clark episode, or once or twice in something else from the 90s. And I feel like it always happens, or it happened typically in TV shows because TV schedules were a lot tighter and they had to churn out the episodes much quicker. I think it's more down to just the amount of time and money they've got to actually get things done, where they don't really have the option of you know, redoing things just for that, or at the very least they think, oh, that's in the safe zone because no one's going to see that because of overscan. That's maybe something they thought at the time in 1985. Obviously today we can just see the boom mic at the top of the frame, so it's whatever. But it gives me a chuckle. I feel like I've caught them with their pants down a little bit, you know. I'm like, ha 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 ha, I saw that. Yeah, I saw that show. Can't fool me. Anyway, so the end of the story is, of course, the husband comes home and she confronts him and has intimate details about how the wife died and accuses him of pushing her off a ledge, where he says she fell off a ledge because she'd been drinking too much. He gets scared at one point and goes for his gun, but she's already got the gun and tries to shoot him and gives chase. Honestly, if I have a critique here, is that Helen Mirren's aim with this gun is absolutely terrible. Like, she just keeps missing, and he's not even that far away, and chases him outside. He climbs over a fence into another house, and it's at this point where she gets frustrated, because as much as we're clear what's happening with the shoes, I don't think the spirit of the wife is aware that the shoes are why she's back, because she just kind of decides when she's chasing after him that the heels are a hindrance and says, these stupid shoes, and kicks them off. And of course, she immediately turns back into meek Helen Mirren, who throws the gun down, is freaked out by where she is. Although Helen Mirren does look down at the shoes, she picks them up, And she, at this point, because she's changed multiple times, or at the very least she's had time jumps multiple times, she realizes the shoes have got something to do with it and throws them in the bin and just leaves, and that's kind of it. And the capper to the show is that the husband's with the police explaining what's happening, and this nut job came and tried to kill me, and they're asking questions about his married life and whatnot. And the whole time the maid is standing in the background. The one thing that I left out earlier is that when the maid was talking to Helen Mirren, she actually grabbed her purse and looked through her ID and stuff like that. She knows that she works at a Goodwill store. She knows what her real name is. She knows all these details, but she's not telling the police. And after the police leave, Jeffrey Tambor actually turns to her and says, "Hey, are you sure she didn't give any other names or let you know anything that would identify her?" And she just says, "Nope." And the reason for this, of course, is that when Helen Mirren, when she was possessed, was confronting the husband and talking about how he killed her, the maid was up in the on the upper floor balcony listening to all of this. And it seemed like all of these things were clicking for her. Like everything that the ghost was saying was making sense with what she knows about him. I think the maid fully believes that he is in the wrong, that he did kill his wife, and she's choosing not to help at the end here because this revenge was just in her eyes. And it's not like this guy's nice to her either. Like he basically fires her right after this, saying that he doesn't need any house staff anymore because he's moving. And she's like, "I was going to quit anyway." But that's basically the end of the story. Other than one little tag, which is that another woman, a maid in the house across the street, finds the shoes in the trash and puts them on, and immediately her face demeanor changes. She becomes the ghost once again. And probably the most unbelievable thing in the story, actually, is that the gun that Helen Mirren threw down is still sitting there. It's slightly obscured by the grass, but it's not. Like, I feel like the police, knowing where he was chased, might have, walked over that area and spotted the firearm just sitting there in the rich neighborhood. It kind of sticks out a little bit. But, yeah, the story ends with this maid, now possessed with the same ghost, walking into the house, and we hear some gunshots as the narrator takes us out. Yeah, I think it's a solid story. I don't think it stands out as being, an amazing one, but I think Helen Mirren's performance is very good. She, plays the meek side very well, but she especially plays the confident side very well. There's a couple of little moments where she'll look into a mirror and you'll see who the dead woman was, you'll see what the wife actually looked like. But for the most part, it's Helen Mirren playing the role, and I think she does a good job. I mean, she's a good actress. She's Helen Mirren. She's very commanding, holds your attention whenever she's on screen. Especially when she's doing the confident stuff, because it really feels like if anything, the opening of the episode where she's acting all timid and scared of everyone is the part that's harder to take, because I'm just so used to Helen Mirren being a more confident character and more, just based on the roles I've seen her in, and admittedly she tends to be older because I've seen her more in stuff that's came after this, but she tends to come over to me as more of kind of a badass old lady in most of the things I've seen her in. And I'm sure that's just because of the certain things I have seen her in, but she tends to exude confidence. So it's actually kind of interesting seeing her in this very kind of conservative dress and acting scared of everyone. But of course, she does her hair up and all those other things when she gets possessed, and because she embodies the confident rich woman. And I think those elements work. I think the idea that this is a woman that's been murdered by her husband coming back for revenge, I do think is instantly a bit more understandable and engaging than just a gangster wanting revenge for his own murder. This is her own murder as well, but I think this maybe paints a villain a little bit better than the original episode did, and you can kind of get onto her side a little bit more. I was also thinking as I was watching this that I was feeling sympathy for Helen Mirren's real character, the meek woman from the start of the episode, because I couldn't help but feel that when she snaps out of it, especially towards the end when she's holding the gun and she throws the shoes away, that, hey, if the police come and find her, she's going to be arrested for attempted murder, and she has, her body's been used by this ghost, and, it's not like she wanted to help the woman. It's not like the ghost asked for her help and she agreed to, let her pilot her body for a while or whatever. She could get into a lot of trouble for this. And the same with the woman at the end, the maid who puts on the shoes and seemingly succeeds in killing the husband. I mean, you don't know for sure, but that's the implication. like, she might get a lot of comeuppance for this, and she doesn't deserve it because it wasn't really her that was pulling the trigger. So I do think there's an interesting element there to explore that we maybe could have done, is the idea of, like, is the host willing, not willing? Are they being screwed over by the ghost because they're just being used to commit a crime? Or is there a slightly different version where the host, knowing what the ghost is going to do, lets them take over anyway because their life is so unhappy that they would rather just be someone else? Like, I think that's a really interesting theme that you could put more into this. I mean, obviously the reason why she puts the shoes on in the first place is for that reason. She wants to feel like someone else. She feels scared as herself. She doesn't feel confident, and she sees the shoes and wants a taste of a slightly better, more exciting life, you know, something just to spice up her day. And then obviously it literally leads to her becoming a rich wife with a revenge plot and everything that comes with that. So I do think there's maybe a little bit more that you could do with the premise in terms of, like, the relationship between the host and the ghost. And that rhymed. I did not mean that, but it did. So here we are. So, you know, there's potential there. But as it is, I do think it's an entertaining enough story that's carried largely by the performance. I do think some of the camera work choices are also quite interesting in focusing on the feet for the first, like, introduction of the main character and showing how she walks, because then it contrasts really well with how she walks once she's put on the dead woman's shoes. Yeah, I would probably lean this to being a bit better than the original version of the episode. And that might just be down to two things, which is Helen Mirren, of course, I think is very good and easy to get on board with. And then the other part being that a murdered wife wanting revenge does just play a little easier. It's easier to get into and sympathize with. That said, though, it does sound like they had a pretty miserable marriage, and it's not like the rich wife necessarily seems like a great person either. And, you know, we're almost entering into Columbo territory where everyone involved is this white-collar criminal who's unsympathetic, and it's, you know, it's up to the real person that Helen Mirren's playing to actually, like, maybe have a happy ending. Otherwise, we're not going to be that satisfied, ultimately. But I'm probably thinking about it too much at this point. But I do think it's a solid story. It's not, I don't think it's going to stand out as being, like, one of the best ones, but I certainly didn't have a bad time, and I enjoyed the performance. So that is Dead Woman's Shoes. The second story is Wong's Lost and Found Emporium. And this is a story that stars Brian Toichi, I want to say. I might have his name wrong slightly. Let me just... Brian Tochi. Yeah, it's probably Tochi rather than Toki, because it's an Asian name. So it's probably not the hard ch, because that's a very Scottish thing, and I'm just showing my my upbringing by saying that. Brian Tochi, I actually recognized that name because he is the voice of Leonardo in the live-action Ninja Turtles movies, which you can hear occasionally. There's a couple of times where he gets a little bit more whiny, and I'm like, oh, that's Leonardo. I can hear it in there. Not that Leonardo is a whiny character, but just the way he voices the character with more longer, drawn-out words kind of came out a little bit there. He's also in a couple of the Police Academy movies, if you have seen that. There's a lot of voice work for the most part, though. Yeah, so this is a story about a... How do I even describe this? So, well, the story starts, at least. Well, how about I'll do that. I'll see how it starts and then go from there. So, this character, who is Wong, David Wong, he is looking for the Lost and Found Emporium, and he's in, like, sort of like a divey back alley kind of area. He goes through a sex shop, and it's just a bit of a joke here that there's a guy trying to return a blow-up doll because there's something wrong with it. So it's not working correctly or something, and it's just kind of a funny little aside here. It's this idea that he's looking for this place, and when he asks if the Lost and Found Emporium is nearby, the owner of the sex shop just says, sometimes it's here, sometimes it's not, but it'll be 2 doors down at the end or whatever. And he's like, huh, okay. And it's worth mentioning here the character, and this goes along with his characterization and what the point of the story is that he is very aggressive. He kind of, like, butts in line and demands to be, you know, given information right now. He's not willing to wait. He's kind of rude. So that's very much setting up what this is. But the Lost and Found Emporium, like, he walks inside it, the door disappears behind him, and it's kind of like a big warehouse, effectively. And what it turns out to be is kind of like a magical place where people can go and discover things that they have lost, but not like physical items. although they become physical items for the purpose of actually being used. But it's like someone might have lost, and I mean, in the case of the main character, he's lost his compassion. Turns out he's lost a few other things, but there's, you know, an old man shows up at one point who's lost his respect of his children. There's a woman early on who's lost her ability to use her hands for her. Oh, I forget what she said she did, but something, you know, some sort of, I don't know if it was art or maybe she was like a designer or something, but her hands didn't quite work anymore because she was older, and she wants that back. So it's the kind of these types of ideas. And when he's there, he sees this glowing orb, which leads him to like the item for this lady, and it's like a tank of like mice, and she's meant to stroke the mice for like a few minutes, and that'll give her back what she's lost. But it doesn't quite work. You know, he doesn't quite give the instructions correctly, and she's upset about it. And then the man comes in who's lost the respect of his children. The orb leads to a mirror, which he's meant to look into, but then he sees like a deformed version of himself and smashes the mirror, still not getting what he wanted, and he's very upset. And then the third person that shows up is this woman about the same age as Wong, who actually starts criticizing him for not caring about the people that he's failing to help, right? These people are like, because he can see this glowing orb that's leading like them to whatever item they need, right? But the people themselves can't see the orb, which is why at this point I thought the story was about the place grooming him to be the new caretaker. Like he's going to be the person who runs this place, and that's why he can see the magic orb that's saying, hey, this is what this person needs. So he's there to guide them and give them information. Now that still ends up kind of being the story, because he decides at the end to take over, and that's why it becomes Wong's Lost and Found Emporium. But the woman who's talking to him here also sees an orb at one point. I think maybe the idea is that you never see your own orb. You can see the other people's orbs, and you're sort of there to help them, but you'll never see your own, because she sees Wong's later on in the episode. That sounds bad. She sees Wong's orb later in the episode. Anyway, so the idea here is that he opens up and explains why he's here, and it's that he's lost all compassion. It's kind of ruined like his relationship with his girlfriend and everyone around him. He's spent ages looking through occult books and fortune tellers and stuff to find this place, as has she. It turns out later on that she's lost the ability to laugh. A bad divorce did that to her. But, you know, he does help her ultimately, and she's able to, I think she breathes in some gas from this like sort of canister, and she starts laughing, and it turns out that, you know, she got her ability to laugh back because these two made a deal to help each other. She's basically trying to encourage him to, like, you know, try, open up, care about the people around you. And then when it's his turn, she sees the orb. It leads to, you know, some items, and she puts out 3 items and says it's one of these, and wants to make him pick, which he's like mad at because like she agreed to help him, but she's playing a game and making him pick one. So he actually takes up 2 of these jars and smashes them, and the fumes from the jars kind of, one, make him remember a happy childhood memory with his parents, and 2, give him back his integrity. Not his compassion, but his integrity. And he realizes that he also lost that, and that's why he could be so mean to people, even without compassion. He should still have the integrity not to do it. But then it turns out that the third like vial or test tube, which had something in it, was broken, and he didn't get to breathe that in, so he never got his compassion back. But he did get these other 2, and he decides to stay and take over this place. And the woman that he's with also says, hey, can I stay here too? You know, I've got no life to go back to either. Like, the person I was didn't really leave much to go back to, so maybe I could help you. So, yeah, it becomes their Emporium. They put out a sign in the door saying under new management, and the story more or less ends with her saying to Wong, hey, why don't you help those 2? And it's the same, you know, it's the man and the woman who he failed earlier. Here's your chance to work with them, and maybe you'll get your compassion back by just finding it again, you know? Maybe the idea being that, oh, the item that will give him back his compassion wasn't like one of the magic items in the shop, it's actually just trying to help these people. Like, his purpose here will ultimately give him his compassion back by actually practicing it. Okay, that was a lot of explaining. Did I like this story? It was okay. I think I kind of, I don't mind the premise of it, and I do think there's an interesting vibe to the location and the orb floating around leading to things, but ultimately it's a little bit kind of just explaining of who the character is, as opposed to actually finding out things about the character through their actions. There's a little bit of that. Like I said at the start, he's kind of abrasive with people. But ultimately, you understand this story because these two characters stop and just explain everything to each other. And that's kind of it. And, you know, ultimately, he goes and like helps her, and then it decides at the end to help everyone who comes in, right? And that's it. I don't know if I got a whole lot out of this one. Like, it feels like kind of a... It almost felt like a kids' TV show, almost, right? In terms of its premise. Like, I could almost see a kids' TV show being about this kind of thing, you know, or even something like a... I don't know, like a Warehouse 13 or a Friday the 13th, the TV show, where you've got like a place that's collecting magical artifacts. Although, to be fair, here it's more like the artifacts just appear out of thin air on a shelf because that's the thing that the person needs, as opposed to anything else. Like, I do think it hits on some harder subjects at the very least. Like when Wong's talking about how he lost compassion, he brings up a story about an Asian man that was killed by a couple of white people because they thought he was Japanese and they wanted to kill him and blame him for ruining America's motor industry, I think was the reason that he said. And he talks about how justice wasn't really had. Like, one of them got off pretty scot-free. The other one, who was, you know, all pretty much as guilty, you know, basically got away with it, but one of them did get retried under civil rights and was put away for 25 years or whatever. But and I did think that, like, bringing that serious idea of a hate crime into it, and that's part of why he's lost his compassion. And he talks about how, like, you know, if he's went on a date with a white girl, like, people look at him like he's a villain for daring to date a white woman and things like that. So it does bring in some bigger, more serious ideas into this. And I do think a story about finding your compassion that you've lost because the world's such a shitty place is a solid idea. I think the problem is, though, is that while maybe we're supposed to get that he has an arc because this woman helps him and that makes him want, or he helps this woman and then she helps him, so that makes him want to help, and finding someone that he can trust in and feel compassion for is a big part of it. It does feel like revolving around all these magical items in this place that just inexplicably creates things for people that they've lost. It makes it all feel a little bit more hokey than I kind of want it to be for the type of themes that it's kind of hitting at. So I think I like what the story's trying to do. I just think that what this story revolves around in terms of like this Emporium and like the magic-y things just happen side of it deflates it a little bit for me, ultimately. Yeah, so I would definitely say I preferred the first story to the second one in this case. This wasn't terrible, though. Like, it was still an easy enough watch, and it was still, like, this was not like, you know, one of those segments from previous episodes where I've been saying, oh, this was torture to get through. I would say this is an okay episode with a pair of stories, one of which I think is pretty solid, and the other one I think is just okay. But that's not bad for a pair of episodes, and we've definitely had worse in the show up until this point. But I definitely didn't feel super strongly about this one. But that's the episode. That's the two stories for this one. I will, of course, be back in a couple of weeks with the next episode of the 80s Twilight Zone. Obviously, you can go back and check out the review of every single episode of the original series. I just finished that. I did the final episode I just did the other day, and that is all done now. I've got one last top 5 video for the last season to come out, and then that'll be me done talking about the original Twilight Zone. So you can go check out that. And of course, you can support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and help keep the reviews coming. I wouldn't be able to do this without the support over there, or via YouTube membership if that's more your thing. I recommend Patreon because you get the bonuses for the movie YouTube channel as well, MailFuzz Movies. Go check it out. There's a sci-fi movie podcast over there. Might be of interest if you're into sci-fi, but you can also do YouTube membership if you would like instead. But that is me, so thank you very much for joining me. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV in the Twilight Zone.